Okay, remember that they're changing my voice. So this video is not about bashing the Jews. It's not about, giving them a hard time or anything like that. This video is about free speech. It's about the truth, the fact of the matter, the heart of the matter, and things of this nature. It's about people's rights to criticize people from a different philosophy or culture. Race and culture are not the same thing. It's about proceeding in a way that is fair and just and right. You don't have to say racist words to criticize somebody. You don't have to bash them or put them in camps. You don't have to torture them. If you don't think that someone's treating you fairly, discuss it with them. And if we had some kind of chat room or something and people started getting angry and calling each other names, I think that should be allowed within reason. Let people get it off their chest. Sometimes we need to yell at each other. Sometimes we need to argue with each other to eventually calm down and say, okay, maybe we got a little carried away, and to hash out the details. Sometimes we're more diplomatic than we otherwise would be after we've had an emotional outburst. So I urge people, especially Jewish people, to listen to what I say. Keep in mind they're making it harder for me to say it. So sometimes I stumble on my words. And truly ask yourself, do you want to live on a planet where people aren't allowed to criticize religions, where they're not allowed to criticize political philosophies under the guise of religions? Do you want to live on a planet where one of the Abrahamic faiths gains the upper hand permanently on the other two and on all other religions and silences them and doesn't allow them their right to practice their religion in its true form? Do we want to live on a planet where authoritarianism dominates, where people operate behind the scenes and they use psychological operations to prevent us from practicing our free speech? They keep us from our freedom of expression, our right to assemble and to discuss these things, our right to discuss these things as men and then to make a pitch to a woman as a man, as a decent and virtuous and dignified man. Is that the kind of planet that you want to live? So this video is about why it is illogical to say that people cannot argue against Zionism and Judaism. Now keep in mind, I think that people should be able to make logical arguments that they believe against Zionism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, okay, you name it. Hinduism, any philosophy, any religion, as long as they're logical arguments and they actually believe them. Okay, on a deeper religious level, because people are basically in the doghouse, so to speak, they don't have the kind of human ground to kind of speak out against me. They shouldn't be allowed to speak out against me specifically. Okay, but I'm willing to explore my religion. I'm willing to debate them, what have you. So when we look at it in terms of what's fair and just and right, okay, in regards to who should be criticized and who shouldn't, well, I'm the only one doing the right thing. Everyone else is like pretending, or they're admitting that they're doing the wrong thing. So it's pretty straightforward there. But on the issue of, legality and what's logical, right? Why is it illogical to say that people cannot argue against Zionism and Judaism? Okay, it's because it's connected to many things. For example, colonialism and neocolonialism and genocide and slavery, and we'll get to that, okay? These things cannot be separated from these other ideas, right? So when you say, what is Zionism, right? It has to do with colonialism, to the point where even Bibi Netanyahu said it's a war of colonialists, right? Colonists and colonialism, right? What he called civilization. Well, that's what he's really referring to, right? Colonialism as a civilizing force, quote unquote, against barbarism, which if you look at what he's saying it includes Palestinians in general, because he holds them responsible as a group. Okay, he's just kind of trying to divide them, and he's trying to push them out, right? And he's trying to expand the borders of Israel. We've seen that consistent with the West Bank and Gaza, what have you. We've seen them expanding into these areas. So to say that you can't argue against Zionism is like saying you can't argue against colonialism. And Zionism is derived from Judaism. So it's screaming a discussion for people to have a discussion about Judaism in general. And what are the differences, if any, between Judaism and Zionism? And what are the forms of Judaism? And why you shouldn't hold it against all Jews if you shouldn't, right? These things, this is a discussion you should have. Okay? And people shouldn't be required to be absolutely right about everything to have a discussion, as long as they're trying to tell the truth to the best of their ability and get to the bottom of it, and they're not just trying to, incite hatred or something, but they're actually trying to have a discussion. So it is illogical to say that people cannot argue against Zionism and Judaism, and it's also unconstitutional. Okay. So let's go through this. Now, they're making it harder for me to speak, right? And is it helping them? No. It's another reason I'm right. When you hear my videos, you understand what I'm saying, unless you're a complete idiot. So I might stumble on my words every once in a long time. I might misspeak or something and correct in the comments or something. Okay? But it doesn't help them. They look like idiots. Right now, with all due respect, I'm not racist, but whites, Jews, and LGBT people as groups, because of associations, they look worse than everyone else on the planet by far. For the same reason the government looks worse than an obnoxious kid who's passing by you on the street or something. Okay, or an obnoxious adult or whatever. Okay. When you're associated with the governments and the oppressors, you look really bad, especially right now and where we are on the human timeline. Okay, so point number 1, colonialism, right? Zionism is connected to colonialism for so many reasons. First of all, and keep in mind, it has to be distinguished between neocolonialism, right? Colonialism versus neocolonialism, right? Colonialism, historical colonialism, okay? Well, there was a lot of white Jews and LGBT people who were leading the charge in colonialism, right? The LGBT part is a little more obscured, so we'll save that for another video. But everyone knows that whites and Jews were some of the main people who colonized America. When you hear about Western colonialism in America, for example, and abroad, they hardly ever make a distinction between Christians and Jews, because there were so many Jews, okay, and they were so similar to the white Christians that they just referred to them as settlers or colonists. You see what I'm saying? And some of these people were deists and they're atheists and there are other things, right? People in cults, including Jews and Christians and LGBT people. But they referred to them collectively as settlers. This is very key here. Because when we're talking about Zionism or Judaism, we're not talking about something that didn't exist in some form or fashion during the Native American genocide, for example. We're talking about something that did exist in some form or fashion during that time, and their philosophies allowed them to do this. So to say that you can't talk about that, it's like saying, hey, you can talk about these other Nazis, but you can't talk about, Goebbels, right? Because he's protected, right? Stupid. No matter what Goebbels is doing, no matter how much he's discriminated against, he has a lot to answer for his philosophy, as in regards to why he didn't stand firm against Hitler. Instead, he supported him. Why did so many Jews and so many Zionists historically support colonialism and neocolonialism? Okay, why did the people who came before the Zionists, if you were to argue that, hey, Zionism occurs when this one guy, I forgot his name, he coins the term, right, later on. So it wasn't like in the 1600s or somewhere, 1500s, 1400s, whatever, right? Well, those people who were thinking like that already, and then he comes along. Just like there was racist Germans before Hitler came along, and then Hitler came along. So the people whose offspring would become, to a large degree, a lot of the Zionists were already there. So the beginnings of their philosophy were already there. It was already there with the colonists who were massacring the Native Americans and enslaving the blacks and abusing people all over the world and so on and so forth. So that leads us to neocolonialism. Right now, neocolonialism is taking place, and there are countless Zionists and Jews who don't consider themselves Zionists involved in neocolonialism. So why do their philosophies allow them to be neocolonialists? Neocolonists. Point number 3, genocide, historical genocide, current genocides that are taking place, okay? Why do so many people believe that Jews, when they speak out against Israel, are controlled opposition? Okay? Why do they believe that? Well, whether or not you believe they are or not, okay, it starts with people who discuss these things, including the people who want to argue against Zionism, who want to argue against Judaism. We want them at the table. We want them discussing these things, and we want to correct any misconceptions they have. As it stands, I myself, I would argue against both those religions, right? The Jews did not accept the Messiah, which is me. They won't give me a fair shake as a group collectively. None of them obey God through me. Countless of them are persecuting me. And countless Zionists are persecuting me. So, everything I know about their groups is they persecute me, and none of them treat me fairly. I mean, it's pretty straightforward, even though I'm part Jewish to some degree. Okay. Point number 4 is slavery. Okay, why did so many Jews own slaves, participate in funding the slave ships, and so on and so forth, right? And the human trafficking, there's Zionists, there's Jews, there's other groups as well. But this is about why it is illogical to say that people cannot argue against Zionism and Judaism. We see time and time again people who identify as Jews, people who identify as Zionists, they're complicit with countless crimes. Okay, and they're still accepted in the Jewish community. They're still accepted in the Zionist community. So it's insane to say that people cannot argue against these groups of people whose philosophy time and time again fails to produce people who aren't criminals, who aren't often operating within the color of law. We look at the first communist committee, or whatever it's called, right, in Russia, when they had their first kind of communist meeting and they started to assign rank. Okay, the people there was tons and tons of Jews involved there. And some of them consider Judaism as compatible with communism. And people argue against communism, including a lot of Jews. So why was their philosophy compatible with the kind of ruthless forms of communism that we saw historically in Russia? Next point is apartheid. Okay, there was countless Jews who supported the South African apartheid regime. How could they turn around and say, hey guys, no, it's not an apartheid state. If it's not an apartheid state, why were you historically the slave masters? Took part in the Native American genocide, and historically so many of you, again, were involved with the apartheid regime in South Africa. There's all kinds of connections, there are U.S. connections as well. Okay, and again, this is specifically about Zionism and Judaism. If you're going to argue that you're above reproach and above insult because you happen to be going through hard times when there's black people getting massacred all over the world, you don't say, hey, don't say things against black people. You don't tell these people not to harass me racially every single day in America, but you're saying don't be anti-Semitic. It's illogical. You supported some of the most potent racist movements in history. And you then turn around and say, don't criticize us. Crazy as hell. Insane. No one with the sense or the sanity would take that stance. And so some of you would say, well, not all Jews supported the apartheid regime. I want all Jews to write down Proverbs 18, verse 9. Again, Proverbs 18, verse 9, according to Judaism, one who is slack in his work is brother to one who destroys. So as all these Jews in California and in America who are aware of gang stalking, especially aimed at me, okay, 23 witnesses on record, mind you, are slack in their work, they are guilty according to their own religion. Read it and weep. In segregation, countless Jews, you think Jews were listed as colored people during segregation? Not white Jews. They're on the white side of the fence. And they weren't exactly leading the charge to abolish slavery. The vast majority of them wanted slavery. They wanted to put their nose up at black people. But then they're going to argue that their relatives in Israel, where it may apply, to whoever the shoe fits, that they're magically not taking part in an apartheid state. Laughable. Okay. Point number 7, Jim Crow. Point number 8, the slave codes, the black codes. Point number 9, Reconstruction. All these things have profound implications on the failure of Judaism and the failure of the rabbis to take a moral stance, to be ready to die for it, and to stand firm for it. Thus, being guilty again using Proverbs 18, verse 9. They were slack in their work, they're sluggards, they're brother to one who destroys. They may as well have been leading the charge themselves according to their own religion. Now, if the charge against me at this point is I'm arguing that Jews aren't really Jews according to their own religion, they're not really following the codes that God gave them, okay, and that people should feel a certain resentment for that, then I plead guilty to that. Absolutely. The truth is the truth. I'm propounding the truth. And it says in Proverbs, the righteous detest the dishonest and the wicked detest the upright. So I detest them for being dishonest while I'm right with God and they're not. And they detest me for being upright. Any Jew who wants to separate themselves from a philosophy that has failed to give the most righteous person in history his rightful place and wants to obey God through me, feel free. But as long as you're cheating me out of my rightful place as a group, without any exception, I'm 100% right to argue against your philosophical grouping. Pretty straightforward. And keep in mind, being Jewish is a religion and not a race. So there's also that angle. We can hash out the details if you want. You'll find that what I'm saying is right. It's not hate speech. These are the facts. If you don't like the facts, maybe you should scramble to do the right thing and improve the facts in their sum total form. Point number 10, constitutional rights. So a lot of the founding fathers, like, Thomas Jefferson, they look Jewish-like. Benjamin Franklin looks like he's a Jew who likes to have an extra helping of food, here and there. Okay, a lot of them look like Jews. A lot of them probably were Jews. I don't know. But I can say this, that it is against the Constitution, which is supposed to be the highest law in the land in America when we look at it in terms of secular law, for them to try to take away my constitutional rights for spitting facts about something in a religious debate. You see Catholics and Protestants debating each other all the time, Christians and Muslims. But you're going to then turn around and say, I can't debate against Judaism and even worse, Zionism? Zionism is like a more toxic and pure evil form of Judaism. You see how it's insane? How's that anti-Semitic? It is anti-Semitic to tell somebody who is part Jewish that he's not the Messiah. You won't debate him in public, and to tell him by your actions that you hate him by persecuting him. Okay, when he's doing what is best for everyone, including the Jews. You are the anti-Semites. I'm the person trying to practice, express my constitutional right, my First Amendment rights. And you're the ones trying to stop me. And you try to use America to stifle dissent. It's very despicable, very despicable. You're no different than those of you who had ancestors that owned slaves. You're no different than your ancestors. Those of you who had ancestors that supported segregation, you're no different than your ancestors. Those of you who had ancestors that slaughtered Native Americans, you're no different than your ancestors. Those of you who had family members that supported apartheid in South Africa, you're no different than those family members. Those of you who had ancestors and family members who funded Hitler with the Avera Agreement, right? You're no different than they are. You have some kind of bad idea, you roll with it, you see it through, and it causes all kinds of problems to occur. Point number 11, the Abrahamic faith argument. I kind of touched on it already, where it is, the foundation, in a sense, of Christianity and Islam, is Judaism, right? The Old Testament is part of the New Testament, and you have prophets in the Old Testament who criticize the Jews and their argument in regards to what Judaism is, and you have people in the New Testament, right, who are criticizing the Jews as well, and you have different factions of Jews criticizing each other. Okay. And so the nature of being from an Abrahamic faith, again, I don't consider myself a Christian, Muslim, or Jew. It's a long story why that is. But I use the Bible more than the vast majority of people who do, to say the least. Okay, my religion is universal, pinpointing, moral precision, focus, moral intensity. But it's a key part of being part of an Abrahamic faith is to debate the other ones. Think about it. So if somebody says they accept that Christ is the Messiah, by default, they're saying that Judaism is wrong. Okay, those who are still Jews, that is, who still practice it, that practice it still is wrong, and that Christianity is right. When someone is a Muslim, they're saying it's not enough to be a Jew or a Christian. They say they're a Muslim. So by their actions, which speak louder than words, they're saying that the other two religions are wrong. Point number 12, wealth distribution. Okay, when you see that we're in a capitalist system where we consider various social philosophies, religions, we consider stuff like this all the time, right? In God we trust, one nation under God, what have you. We consider these things. Okay? And we consider these things in terms of economic growth and wealth distribution and the wealth gap and the wage gap and so on and so forth. It is insane to say that you can't argue against a philosophy or religion that is a key part of the process in regards to determining what the economy should be, for instance. Okay, So as we look at wealth distribution, what the Jews think they should do and how they interpret the Torah is a huge part of it. Huge. And there's so many, when you really do a lot of research into American history, you see that Judaism was a huge part. I came across a video by a Jewish gentleman the other day, a rabbi, who was talking about how the principles of Judaism were a huge part of American history, and his argument made a lot of sense, okay? So, and he started arguing that some of the American philosophy that we have in our secular system actually comes straight from the Torah. And if I can find the video, I'll bring it up again later or something. But anyway, I just want to finish this one off. I'm having trouble speaking, so on and so forth. Point number 13 I brought up is sneak dissing. Now, it was hard for me to think of a term. This is just like a rough draft, but I'm doing a pretty good job, so I'm just going to use this rough draft. Sneak dissing is basically when, you diss somebody in a way that's indirect. Okay, so say you didn't like black people and you started talking about hip hop and you started talking about soul food and, say some people like fried chicken and they don't use their heads, and you do it in a certain way that clearly paints a certain picture that you're insulting somebody. Okay, so Zionists and Jews are very much into sneak dissing. Oh man, I don't even know where to start there. It's in the system. It's in corporations. If you want, we can go point by point. There's a lot to this one here. Everyone knows it's true, right? It's just like, if a Southern judge was saying to a black person, right? He's like, okay, boy, how about, you do the right thing, okay? How about, were you raised in a barn or something, right? He's sneak dissing like the whole race. 99 times out of 100, if a white judge in the South is talking to a black defendant in a courtroom saying that he was raised wrong and people like you and stuff like this, he's actually a racist judge. And everyone knows it. And there's all kinds of things like that in society, and the Jews are no exception. Like, so many groups do this, so many groups. And I'd say the whites, Jews, and LGBT are some of the main groups that do it. You see on the news these days, I'm sure all of you know that I'm right about that. If you really disagree and you really think that I'm wrong, we can explore in the comments. I want to keep this going. I got some other points to get to. I'm on 14 of 23. I want to shoot through this. 14, gun rights. America's policy in regards to Israel and how to treat Hamas and so on and so forth has everything to do with gun rights. Some of these mass shootings had to do with Jews and synagogues, what have you. Point number 15, mental health. Okay, a lot of Jews were influential in the mental health process. Psychologists, what have you. Psychiatrists, what have you. Lots from Franz Kallman. Okay, we look at Freud and Jung. You see a lot of Jewish influence, right? Especially atheistic Jewish influence, people who are of Jewish descent, quote unquote, who are atheists and agnostics. You see some of these guys are Jewish-ish, right? Jew-ish, right? And so on and so forth. We're in a Judeo-Christian culture and on and on and on, right? So when we look at mental health, whether or not someone gets drugged against their will, it has a lot to do with the philosophies of Zionism and Judaism. Look up the political abuse of psychiatry if you don't believe me. You'll see that it is crystal clear, okay? It's been used historically against people who go against the status quo, and the Jews are very much a part of the status quo. So right now I can guarantee you that mental health is being used against people who speak out against the Jews to various capacities. If you were to say things like you don't believe that the Jewish opposition to Israel is valid while criticizing Israel, if you were to isolate yourself politically and start criticizing people, right, that you would find that it's very likely that they would say that you're mentally ill and try to drug you and try to control you and financially sabotage you and give you a hard time and act like you're crazy and so on and so forth. People are very immature when it comes to this, and we see that occurring here. Okay, if you have any questions about that, put in the comments. I'm sure 99.999% of people who would hear this video would agree with me already. Okay. 16. Okay, when we look at the concept of rape by deception. Okay, rape by deception. We see that people's understanding of reality is key here. Their conception of reality. Their conception of right and wrong. And we see that Zionism and Judaism, in a Judeo-Christian culture, where Israel's like the main ally of America that's being talked about all the time in the news, more than Ukraine, more than like anything you could imagine. Palestine, 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 on and on and on. Okay? People's conception of who to date, of right and wrong, is very much determined by Zionism and Judaism. And one of the most common, in fact, the most common form of rape by deception is the result of deceptive social norms. For example, in Nazi Germany, they had the Lebensborn program. People wouldn't only date people based on their conception of what is right and what is wrong and what they should do, while they're being deceived in regards to these things, mind you, but they would purposely bring in their children based on these conceptions. So it was like a breeding program. And we see it with dating in general, right? Why are there so many gold diggers in America, for example, when in tribal communities, being a gold digger was like laughable. It was the dumbest thing in the world. People didn't respect it all. They looked in it in a more deep manner in the vast majority of cases, right? What gold did they have in the first place? Okay, so some people were better at hunting. Some people were more handsome. Some people more skilled at this or that. But they didn't amass a lot of wealth. So people were dating based on the content of the character more often. And it doesn't take a genius to see that, right? And it's just, what other way could it be, right? And so we see that there's a bunch of whites, Jews, and LGBT people who are rich. There's Asians who are rich. There's certain types of people who are rich, and people are following the money. And they're following the characteristics and the social norms that come with the money. And so we see that Zionists and Jews are a huge part of the massive rape by deception process, where even the Son of God is shunned by women. I'm being shunned by women. While they're trying to convince people to play stupid, and they are convincing people to some degree because they are playing dumb, like everyone and their mom, to play stupid in regards to what's ideal. They find themselves dating a racist Jew who's persecuting the Son of God with his friends and his family instead of dating the Son of God. Okay, talk about being deceived. I shouldn't have to explain that more than that, right? It's pretty straightforward. Point number 17, internet censorship. Okay, is Zuckerberg a Jew? You betcha. Are there Jews who are running various sites with their allies? Plenty of Fish, almost certainly. Tinder, over there in Hollywood. Hey, there's a bunch of Jews there. Now, it's not just Jews. I'm not saying they're just Jews. There's lots of whites and minorities on these people on the staff, okay, and investors. I'm sure there's other investors besides Jews, but their philosophy partially went into the creation of these dating sites and the censorship on these dating sites and the selective enforcement of censorship that occurs on their dating sites. And I'm sure you all know I'm right to a T. Unless you're complete idiots. And if you disagree with any of these points, put in the comments. Watch, you won't see anybody with any logical argument in regards to any of these points in terms of them disagreeing with them. Nobody will. Okay? And that's part of the deception. When you have no viable counter argument for the fact that I'm the ideal person, for example, okay, and if attractive women should be dating me, and they're still not dating me, okay, the people they are dating, the sex they are having, is the result of the philosophies that go into rape by deception. If you don't know that, you are an idiot. If you don't know that, my goodness, were you born yesterday? Were you raised in a barn? What have you? Point number 18. The college rules. If you don't know that Zionism and Judaism went into the college rules in regards to protesting how Palestinians are treated and stuff like this, man, what the hell? That's all I got to say to that. Okay. Point number 19, the definition of a terrorist. Okay, it's derived from the Abrahamic faiths, including Judaism, and it's derived from Zionism. Okay? I mean, look at what Bibi Netanyahu's saying these days. He's saying Israel is fighting, and he's not the only one, fighting Hamas and other terrorist organizations, who they define as terrorists. Okay, whether I agree with them or not, I'm not going to put in this video. I don't support Hamas, but I don't agree that these people should be defining terrorists. They're highly political. They have ulterior motives. They're not honest. Okay, no one is honest on this planet but me. That's what I've seen time and time again in my life. Okay, and I've made mistakes in the past. I've corrected them all. Okay, the definition of terrorist itself. Okay, so I have to kind of argue with people who are Zionists. People who see themselves as not being Zionists, but seeing themselves as a Jewish person, a person of the Jewish faith, as well as other types. So why should I be able to argue against, atheists and Satanists, but magically skip over these super influential Zionists and these super influential Jews? It doesn't make any sense. Point number 20, women's rights. Okay, the most pronounced feminists historically were disproportionately Jews, right? Gloria Steinem. Look it up. Okay, look up Lilith magazine. Look up Tel Aviv and Israel's secular community and their stance on women's rights. Very influential, very influential. As they say, feminism and LGBT movements go hand in hand for the most part. And Tel Aviv is considered like the LGBT capital of the whole world. It's Tel Aviv, it's San Francisco, Paris, what have you, certain places. One of these few places is the major center for LGBT politics and feminism. So these people can make a huge fuss about what they think their rights should be, but I can't argue that it against the religions and the philosophies that are the foundation of their feminist thinking. Makes no sense. 21. Okay. Issues related to psychological warfare. 22, international law. 23, conspiracy theory, right? You know, there's conspiracy like Hamas conspiracy, Hezbollah, Houthis, Hamas, Iran. That's a conspiracy. Part of politics is conspiracy theory. And they think they should have a monopoly on conspiracy theory. And he says, who thinks that? Well, there's a bunch of Zionists, there's a bunch of, Christians, there's a bunch of people, and some of these groups include Zionists and Jews. And it's part of the expected output of their philosophy as practiced by the masses of them. We'll get to that later.